Alright guys, this is Sam Garfolo here from OptiPro Systems. Today we're going to go over what's new with Mastercam 2022, design, and general enhancements. So we're going to start off here with design. And the biggest improvement to Mastercam design this year is the new mesh tab. So meshes or STLs are files that are commonly associated with 3D printing and 3D scanning. They're very difficult to work with, they're difficult to move around your screen, they're difficult to use for machining, and just in general they're difficult to edit. So generally these meshes or STLs, you'd have to use another piece of software to edit them, such as SpaceClaim. We can now go ahead and edit these STLs or meshes right inside of Mastercam. So let me show you a few things that the mesh tab can do. So what I have here is actually a really clean scan, or really clean mesh, I should say. But I have some gaps inside of this mesh that I need to patch up. So if I go to my mesh tab and I use fill holes, just like we have for surfaces, I can click on my mesh and it will highlight in red all of the gaps that I have on my model. So I can go through here and select all those gaps. I can click on End Selection and then the resulting green check. And I'll go ahead and plug up any hole that I selected. See, no surprises there in that hub. That looks good. The other thing that I mentioned is STLs or meshes are very difficult to machine. The reason for that is they highlight as one piece when you select it. So even if you're trying to just select this pocket, when you click it, it's going to automatically select the whole model, and that's what you're going to end up cutting. So let's take a quick look here with what we can get away with in the Mesh tab to fix that. So now we have something called Explode Mesh, which will actually take your mesh and explode it into smaller individual meshes that you can actually use for machining. So I'm going to try out this Explode Mesh. Click my model. And I can use these settings here to determine how exactly it breaks up the different components of my model. Just with the default settings here, you can see it broke up this mesh into different color-coded pieces. Each one of these different colors is a different mesh. So the body of my mesh is mainly intact, but it seems like it broke these pockets into individual components. So I can hit the green check now. And as you can see, as I hover my cursor over, these highlight individually. So I can now go ahead and use some of these meshes for machining. So I'm just going to do a simple equal scallop toolpath here. And I'm going to go ahead and select just this simple pocket. And something not a lot of people use here is this include silhouette boundary. This is a really slick function. This isn't new, but what it does is it will keep your toolpath inside of the boundary of whatever you selected. So since I clicked on this pocket, it uses the extent of that pocket and it will keep it inside of that. So it's like I selected a containment boundary, but I didn't have to create any geometry to do that. I'll just go ahead and create a 1/4 inch, make it a little small end mill, we'll just say that, and we'll hit the green check and let this thing rip. And if I play that thing through, it's just going to go ahead and machine that pocket. So once again, that never used to be possible. It would always select your whole model. Now with Mastercam 22, we can take a mesh, explode it into individual components, so we can go ahead and actually machine it. Let's take a look at a couple more mesh functions. So right here I have a scan of a jug, and whenever you have scans, you might have ran into this before. You end up with these facets that you need to remove. So let's go ahead and see if we can actually go ahead and get rid of these facets. So what I'm going to do from a top view is I'm going to go to Modify Mesh Facets. And I'm just going to simply tell Mastercam to remove these facets. And it gives you this little brush tool, as they call it, inside of Mastercam. And I can use this tool to touch all these individual facets that I want to remove. I'm just going to spin this around so I don't miss any, which I usually do. And once you think you've grabbed them all, or you've got it close enough, let's go ahead and hit the green check and the green check again. So once again here I was able to go ahead and remove all those facets just by simply scrubbing them away. And from here we can either do fill holes and plug this hole up, or maybe we want to make a design change using modify mesh facets. Say remove facets. Maybe I want to open up the whole mouth of this jug so it looks different. So I can make my brush radius a little smaller, and I'm not going to take my time on this one. I'm just going to touch as much of these facets as I can. Green check and green check again. And just by doing that, I've opened up the entire mouth of this jug so I can make this look however I want to. Or I can undo that, like I said, and we can do fill holes on this guy instead. Click our model, click our hole that we want to fill, green check here, and we can plug that hole up just as well, right? So once again, meshes and STLs are very difficult to work with. We've always needed another piece of software to work with these. Now with Mastercam 22, you could do all that right inside of the software. Hey, one last thing I'll talk about in terms of meshes. This is another slide I stole from one of the YouTube videos that Mastercam has on YouTube. And I just wanted to mention that their YouTube videos that they've been putting out there are awesome. So they go over a lot of the new features inside of Mastercam, go over just general tool paths inside of Mastercam, goes over dynamic. But they do have a really nice video for this mesh tab. So they go over all the different things you can do with the mesh tab, and this is just one thing they showed. Is I know sometimes these scans look really crude and you need to smooth them out. So there's obviously different smoothing methods that we give you to do that. So these are just a couple screenshots from that video. I would definitely tell you guys to go check out those videos, not just the mesh one, check out all their videos, but the mesh one is really, really good if you're interested in going with that mesh tab. Going into some more design stuff here, push-pull came out several revisions ago. It's been a really popular function. It allows us to click a face of a model and pull it out or push it in. We've only been able to do that on one solid body at a time. Now with Mastercam 22, we can select multiple solid bodies all at once and push-pull them at the same time. Overflow UV. This is going to be really big for all of my Flowline users out there. So the problem with the Flowline toolpath is it doesn't work very well for several surfaces. So it's not one of those toolpaths where you can really window your part and tell the Flowline toolpath to cut everything. And the reason for that is because individual surfaces flow different, right? So each surface has its own flow, has its own UV curves, and they generally don't match up when you go from one surface to the next. So when you use a flow line and you window surfaces, one surface can cut one way, the next surface right next to it can cut 90 degrees from it. So you don't get this nice flowing motion of a toolpath. In 2021, we came out with something called Reflow UV, which you can use pieces of wireframe to influence how a surface is going to actually flow. In 22, we now have something called Overflow UV, where I can simply take a surface that has the pattern that I want, and I can go ahead and apply that to all surfaces underneath. So this way, when I want to go ahead and write a flowline toolpath, I can go ahead and just select these multiple surfaces, and it should cut the same pattern that we see here. Also new to 22, whenever you create a surface now, it automatically shows an arrow on your screen showing you the normal of that surface. So previously this wasn't the case. You'd create a surface and you didn't know the normal was wrong until you wrote a toolpath on the surface and it was cutting on the wrong side. So now with 22, it automatically shows you the arrow when you create the surface so you know if your normal is correct or not. We have some new quick and easy ways to create and edit tool axes lines for multi-axis toolpaths. So we have something here called Modify Vector. You can use this to click a line. It automatically snaps your gnomon to the bottom of that line, and you can use this to change the angle. We're going to take a look at this in just a second. And to create these toolpath lines, we have the ability to use line normal to grid, which you can pretty much select the surface, set your spacing, and it will create lines normal to the surface at the spacing you selected. We also have line normal along chain, where I can select a chain and it will create my tool axis lines normal to the surface along that chain. So let me go over those with you guys. Let me close out of this, and I'm just going to reload it so I got a fresh start here. All right. So let's go ahead and create some tool axis lines on these surfaces. If I go to my Wireframe tab, I have an option here called Line Normal to Grid. I can use this to select these surfaces, and this is one where I can just go ahead and set my spacing and then tell it how long I want these lines to be. Okay, so I don't really need these many lines. I'm just going to try to cut this line here. So I really only need lines that are along this chain. So this is overkill for what I'm trying to do. I'm going to hit the X here to get out of it. What I would rather do here, given what I'm trying to accomplish, is I'm going to use line normal along chain. So I'm going to select my surfaces that I want my lines to be normal to, and then I'm going to select my chain. And it will create lines normal to the surface along that chain, and it will create as many here as I specify. And 7, that's fine with me, that'll work. And I'll hit the green check. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to write a simple curve 5-axis toolpath. Whatever tool it wants to use is fine. And I'm going to tell it to cut this line right here. If you've never used a multi-axis toolpath, the next page, Tool Axis Control, determines how your tool tips and tilts as it cuts your feature. So I'm going to tell it to just use these lines we've created. So the tool is always going to stay normal to how these lines are pointing. Oops, I misclicked that one. All right, so I've grabbed my lines here. I'm going to go ahead and hit the green check. And I'm just going to go ahead and let it rip. So the problem that we're obviously going to run into here is these lines are straight up and down. And as I get to this feature right here, my tool is going to go ahead and crash right into it. So what I actually need to have happen here is I need to have my tool tilt away from this feature so we don't have a crash. So to do that, we're going to use this Modify Vector option. And how this works is we're simply going to click on a line. It gives us our gnomon. And we can now use this gnomon to change the tilt of these lines. I'm just going to tilt these away at roughly 25 degrees or so. And I'm just making that right up. 25, that looks good. And I'll do the same right here. And to know if that worked or not, all I have to do is regenerate my operation. It's using these lines to determine how it tilts. So if I regen and I play this thing through, my tool starts off pretty much straight up and down, but as it gets towards that feature, it starts to tilt away. And as it's done here, or after it's done, it will tilt back to normal and finish cutting that line. Okay, so for me, the Modify Vector thing, that's awesome. What I like even more is the ability to quickly and easily create these toolpath lines. Sometimes it's a bit of a bear. You have to set your 2D and Z0 to make sure you're creating them in the right spot. So this is going to save you a ton of time. Click your line, click your surfaces, get your toolpath lines, use your Modify Vector if you need to change them. And they're actually going to show you another feature while I'm in here. We have another wireframe function here with Mastercam 2022 called Cut Curve Along Slice. Okay, and how this function actually works is if I go to my Wireframe tab at the top of my screen and I hit my Curve Slice drop down, we have Curve Slice Along Curve. And what I can actually do here is select a model that I'd like to slice. So that can be a surface model or a solid model. And then it's going to ask you to chain a piece of wireframe to use to slice. So it's going to create slices perpendicular to the line that you've selected. So if I hit the green check here, it's going to give me this preview of my planes that it's going to slice in here, and that looks just fine here. I'll hit enter, and you'll notice what it does here is it goes ahead and will create slices on your model based on how many slices you told it to take here. Okay, so just another new wireframe feature that we have, and we have another one here as well. Create curve center. So how this works is we can chain two pieces of wireframe, these dark blue lines in our case, and what it will actually do is it will create a line smack dab in between those two curves. Some transform enhancements. We now have the ability to rotate and translate about a piece of wireframe. So I can, for example, select this circle and it rotates in a rotates option here, and it will go ahead and rotate my part as it goes around the circle. If we use the translate option, it'll keep our part in its current orientation and move it around that circle just as well. Sticking with transform, we have the ability now to copy in both directions using dynamic. All we have to do here is when we do a copy, check the box both directions, and we can offset this twice. The solid manager got a bit of a facelift. So did the toolpath manager. We'll talk about that here in a couple slides. But what this is showing us is just the difference of how it used to look in 21 versus how it looks now. And specifically, the difference between how a sheet body used to look in 21 versus how it looks now. So now when you have a sheet body, it looks like this flat solid. So you have a quick visual telling you it's a sheet body, so you know right off the bat it's not going to be that easy to work with. Top level editing for wireframe entities. This is just a really new, quick and dirty way to edit wireframe. So if I go back to any of these parts that we have open, I'm just going to draw a quick rectangle. And if I want to edit any of the lines on this rectangle, all I have to do is double click on it, and it automatically gives me some functions. It gives me this arrow where I can slide this line to wherever I want. I can grab an endpoint, change that endpoint, grab it by the center, pick it up and move it wherever I want. Okay, so once again, just a few nice quick and dirty wireframe editing functions that you now have available. Let's talk some general enhancements here. So probably the biggest general enhancement that we have is the ability to borrow network licenses. So for those of you who are on software licensing, you now have the ability to work from home, or you've had the ability, I should say, to work from home, VPN back into your server at work, access your licenses, and you can program at home just as you could if you were in the office. But there are obviously times where you're not going to have access to internet. Okay, or maybe you just have shoddy internet at home and you'd rather work locally. So what you can now do is, if you can access your work network, so whether you VPN in or you're physically at work, you can go ahead and actually take some of those licenses that you have on your server, keep them local on your computer so you can use them for however long you'd like. So it's going to be done here with this license borrow utility. You can go in there, tell Mastercam which licenses you need. You need a seat of lathe, seat of mill 3D, and you need it for how many days. Okay, it will check it out to your computer, and when you're done with those, you can log back in via VPN, return the licenses so people at work can use them, or you can wait till you get back in the office and return them that way as well. I've always said that the Home Learning Edition has everything Mastercam has to offer, but I was actually not telling the truth in that case. We were actually missing a few add-ons. So Mill Turn, Port Expert, Blade Expert, Productivity Plus, and Pro Drill. Those are now included in the 2022 HLE. So The 2022 HLE is the full-blown version of Mastercam. So you have every bell and whistle possible. You just can't save those files to work on in a full version of Mastercam, and you can't post code. Okay, so it's just for getting familiar with the software, learning how it works, checking out these new features. Here's another cool one. We now have the ability to analyze our model even when we're in a toolpath. So even if I have this toolpath page open here and I'm working on my raster toolpath, it looks like, let's say I wanted to make sure the radius, the tool I'm using has the right radius for what I'm trying to cut. I can go in here and I can dynamically analyze any of these features. I can use analyze entity, any of those analyze functions to analyze my model, even when my toolpath is up on my screen. Another pretty neat one here is the ability to dynamically adjust the start and end of your chain. So if we take a quick look at this, if I want to go ahead and cut, let's say, this line right here, I can select it. If I hit the green check, by default Mastercam is going to cut the entire length of that line. But what if I don't want to cut the whole line? Okay, I have the ability here to click on dynamic. This function's been here for a while, but what it did is it only adjusted the start of your chain. Now we can use it to adjust the start and the end. So if I click on dynamic, I can take my green arrow for where my chain starts, and I can say I'd rather start that chain right about here. And maybe I want to adjust the end of that chain as well. Click on dynamic again, and take the end of that chain and slide it wherever the heck I'd like. So now instead of cutting that whole line, I'm only going to cut the distance between these two arrows. So let's see what that looks like. Just hit the green check. If I play that thing through, you'll notice that we're not cutting the whole line. My tool arcs in and I start cutting right here, about halfway through that feature. And then I arc off once I hit my endpoint. Okay, so just a quick and easy way to adjust where exactly your toolpath starts cutting and where it ends cutting. If you've been with us for a couple of years, you've probably noticed that Mastercam's made adjustments to the notes function, I'd probably say over the last 4 years or so. And every year they've just made it better and better. Big thing this year is notes had previously been created as drafting entities, which that's pretty much useless to most people. You'd have to take those and break them up into wireframe entities. If you want to use them for machining, for design purposes, turning it into a solid, what have you. So now with 22, by default, notes are wireframe entities. So they come in just as wireframe. You can chain them, you can use them for toolpaths, extrude them into solids. You can do whatever the heck you want with them. You can now link and unlink planes very easily. So let's say you're programming on a tombstone and you want to have all your planes linked to your top plane so they don't ever move, right? You can do that. So now they're all associated with one another. If you were to move one of those planes, they would all move, right? So you can make it so they're all linked to each other. And what I would say is you can also go in junction with the next slide, which is lock them together. So you can lock a certain plane. You can link your 4 planes that are around your tombstone. You can link them to your top plane and then lock that top plane so none of these planes can ever move on you, right? So you can make sure the way that it's currently programmed and it's currently outputting is the way it's going to stay. Someone can't come in here and move one of your planes or your part and mess up your programming. Okay, here's the big change that you didn't know you needed. So in 22, we now have this checkbox for generate toolpath. And that does exactly as it says, is whenever you hit the green check of your toolpath, it's automatically going to generate your toolpath. Now that always happens the first time you go into a toolpath and create it, but every time you go into it afterwards, you have to regenerate it every time. So now you can check this box. As soon as you hit the green check to get out of the toolpath, it automatically regenerates that toolpath for you. Super helpful. It's been probably my favorite change, or one of them, in 22. But if you go back to a previous revision like 21, remember that checkbox doesn't exist, because I did that before and I was waiting for my toolpath to generate for a couple minutes. Just remember that doesn't exist in previous revisions. You might be waiting a while. Now with 22, we have the ability to automatically view our tool on our cursor. So this is nice. You can set your tool so it's attached to your cursor. You can slide your cursor around your part and check the fit of that tool in different locations to make sure you're not going to crash. You can now copy and move entities to a level simply by right-clicking. So if I want to move stuff from level 1 to level 2, I can right-click on my level 1, copy, right-click on level 2, paste, move stuff from one level to another easily. Like I said before, the Tool Manager got a bit of a facelift, as did the Solids Manager. So now with 2022, the icons just got a bit of a different look here. If you ever notice that one of your tool paths looks gray, it's still usable, you can still work with it. It just means that you've turned off the wireframe or the geometry used in that tool path. Another neat change here in 22 is Mastercam will always show you how long it takes for a toolpath to generate. Right, so right now I can see this toolpath took 27 seconds. This one's a bit of a large program, it took 50 seconds. Okay, so this might help you determine whether or not you want that automatic toolpath regeneration checkbox checked. Right, if it's going to take 10 minutes to regenerate your toolpath, maybe you don't want that check if you're just going to poke around that toolpath for a bit. In 22, we now have the ability, or customers, I should say, have the ability to give feedback inside of Mastercam. So there's this little button up in the upper right-hand corner of your Mastercam. You can tell Mastercam you either like the software, you don't. You can go ahead and tell them what you would like changed, what you're having troubles with, all that kind of stuff. So we do have some simulation enhancements here in 22. The biggest is going to be the ability to easily measure things inside of Verify. So we've always been able to measure inside of Verify, but it was a bit cumbersome. It wasn't very accurate. Now with Mastercam 22, we have the ability to easily measure things. We can also now measure different things, such as angles, such as curves. And previously, we were only able to measure points and the distance between 2 points. Also, something new to simulation is the proximity alert. So previously we could tell Mastercam to alert us when we have a collision. We can now tell Mastercam to alert us when two things are getting too close to each other. Right, so if I wanted my holder to stay away from my part by a certain distance and it gets within that distance, it will actually highlight our tool yellow and it will give us a stop, just as a collision would in Verify. Okay, but that is what's new here in Mastercam 22 with design and general enhancements. And at this point, I would like to open it up for questions.